start deportation, yes, to have deportation. Right. There, exactly. And many of those, all of those for-profit corporations used to do prisons and local jails, and there was that huge movement from the criminal justice folks to stop using private companies. And at the same time that their business was going like this in the 90s, the Clinton administration and Republican Congress pushed all of this discussion back into immigration policy. Well, the only way they can get detainees is to pick people up for deportation. The only way someone ends up in immigrant detention, and they just assume that that's a long-term business model because a lot of people you deport, all of their family and their livelihood is here and they come back. So it's a addicting process. They are. They're loving and strong enforcement laws. Because that is the bottom line is.
Test. Test. For those of you on the stream who are waiting for Sister Simone, we're just ever so slightly behind schedule, so probably Sister Simone will start speaking in another 5 minutes. Thank you for hanging with us, and she'll begin shortly.
And I can do this, yeah.
Oh, somebody probably can see her.
Yeah.
Can I kidnap one of these?
Which one? This?
Legal ones?
Yeah.
Because I kidnapped one of yours.
And let me just, or can you? Okay, I'll do it really fast. Okay, everyone, come back, come back, come back. I see you in the hallway, come back. It's been 10 minutes. You won't get to hear as much of Sister Simone if you don't come back. Come back to us, come back. So while folks are coming back, I just wanted to say, I didn't know this because I woke up this morning and drove to my office and then drove here and was like running, but the Denver Post issued an editorial this morning in favor of Ingrid being granted a pardon. Which is really unexpected, and I hope that the governor gets the post in DC, where he's working on healthcare right now. But yeah, that gives me some hope, which is good. Okay, where did Marcy go? Okay. I need to.
Thank you for your presentation and for the very good news. Okay, I think we're almost here. What's going to happen after Sister Simone speaks is that we'll have a Q&A time, and I'll have a mic that I will just carry around. So, the first time I saw Sister Simone Campbell was at the 2008 Democratic National Convention in Denver. I was a delegate for our county, and she was invited to speak there by the then presidential candidate Obama, because her views on social and economic justice matched his. Those were the good old days, weren't they? Then in 2012, after Representative Paul Ryan tried to make a case that his austerity agenda was in keeping with Catholic social justice teaching, Sister Simone and her colleagues begged to differ. Their organization, Network, the Catholic Social Justice Lobby, decided to focus attention on moral objections to Ryan's budget with the Nuns on the Bus tour to challenge Ryan's economic extremism. After the tour, among other venues she was a guest of Bill Moyers and Stephen Colbert, skyrocketing her and her fight for the poor and marginalized to national fame. The tour was widely touted as the action that gave the Catholic Church credibility in this country. Sister Simone is an attorney who lobbies on almost every issue of social and economic justice, from health care to immigration reform. WWJD, what would Jesus do? If you are ever in doubt, just ask Sister Simone. It is with great admiration for her person and her mission that we welcome Sister Simone Campbell.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Oh, yes, lead a quiet life. Join the convent. That's my idea. Well, I have to say, it is such a treat and treasure to be here. And talking about immigration, because as we were all looking at how immigrants got here historically and Angel Island, I was thought of my great-grandfather who came to Denver in 1861. He had left home, he had left Spain. The story goes, we don't know if it's true or not, but it's a good story. He left home, but about 13 or 14, one of the younger kids, went to Cuba and learned the cigar rolling trade, then went up to New York City somehow, and ended up migrating here to Denver and created this thing called dry climate cigars. And if you Google dry climate cigars, apparently somewhere still up in maybe Cripple Creek or one of the old mine towns, there still is an old sign for dry climate cigars. So Mr. Solis from Spain created this amazing thing. And then apparently he lost a fortune and gained a fortune and lost a fortune, gained a fortune, and ended up poor. So my family were the strugglers in the family, but I value deeply my Denver roots. My dad grew up here and my mom grew up in Aurora. And her dad, my grandpa, ran the two newspapers in Aurora, the weekly newspapers, the Aurora Democrat and the Adams County News. And my memory, my childhood memory, is that I, as the oldest, was, probably at the age of 4, was able to help my grandfather assemble the legals, because he printed the legals for the county. I guess they were like the legislation and all this. I could reach the top of the dining room table, and I have a childhood memory of the edge of the dining room table and me helping Grandpa, what we would now call collate, but I called it organize. So I have a lot of fond memories that weave into this story of immigration. But there's one that I want to share with you from actually just yesterday, because I think what it says is about the anguish of this time on this issue. Yesterday morning, well, actually it was Thursday evening, we got an email from one of our contacts in Leader Pelosi's office saying, we're having a special meeting on immigration. Could you please come? Blah, blah. And so somebody, but we can only have one person from each organization. So I talked to Laura Peralta, who Terry's been in contact with over there. And we decided I should go. And then I email saying, well, I'm coming. And I get an email back saying, oh, that'll make the leader delighted or something like that. How sweet. That's really nice. So then I get there, and Leader Pelosi comes in. She's shaking hands with everything because the immigrant community has been freaked, frantic, name-calling, irate, all the things that we all have felt with the DACA statement this week, right? And so she leans over to me and she says, well, I hope you can give us some hope today. And, oh, yeah, right. So I thought, well, I'll do my best. You know, I'm always willing to serve. And so then what happens is all these members of Congress are there. She introduces everybody. They're going to have to run out and take votes. But right after she introduces everybody, she calls on me to give a word of hope. And it was like, come, Holy Spirit, help. And that's sort of how I feel here, is that in the power of these oh so challenging times, in the face of a white supremacist approach, in a face of white privilege that causes all of us who walk in white skin anguish, in the face of the seeming impossible, then somebody turns to you and says, oh, please give us a word of hope. I want you to know that we together are the hope. We together are the opportunity. And what I said there is kind of the intro to what I wanted to say here. Is last week I ended vacation, and my last 3 days of vacation I happened to be in Amsterdam by plan, not just happen, I realized, but because I wanted to go to the Van Gogh Museum. I wanted to be nourished by the beauty of Van Gogh. But before I went for the second time to the museum, I went to the Resistance Museum. The Resistance Museum in Amsterdam is a museum about the resistance during World War II. To the Nazi reality. And in it, they portray in a very compelling way the choices that were faced by the Dutch people. And over again, they ask the question, what would you choose? And the choices they had, as portrayed in the museum, were they could collaborate and try to minimize the hurt and damage. They could resist and risk their lives, or they could hide. And after finishing the museum, I realized, aren't those the choices in our nation at this time? We can collaborate and try to make things better. And last week, the beginning of the week, on Tuesday, I was at the White House meeting with White House staff, trying to minimize the damage. We can resist. I went from the White House meeting outside to the DACA demonstration outside the White House. I wanted to cover both bases. But the resistance that is key to hold our sanity. Or at times we need to hide. After the election, I quit watching television news. I couldn't bear it. And what I realized was that hiding for me was a chance to gain strength for this time now. And the fact is, on the issue of immigration, this is one of the most difficult, intractable, challenging times because of the issue of our original sin as a nation, with the issue of racism and economic domination. Our original sin of racism grew out of what owners saw as economic necessity, and which many of us now call economic exploitation. And yet it continues to today and is seen as the requirements of the economy. I was lobbying last, when was it? In the spring. It's hard to believe it's September. Anybody else have that trouble? In the spring, and we were working for increased wages. And one of the things that's annoying me no end is that our low-wage workers are having to use the social safety net to survive. I mean, that's just wrong. That makes the social safety net a business subsidy. And business is not lobbying to increase the social safety net. They're trying to hide. So I'm trying to out them in a humble and very certain fashion. So I was lobbying about it, and finally we were with a chief of staff, and he said to me, "Oh, but Sister Simone, the economy requires it. To do otherwise would make the economy vulnerable." And I said, "Well, what about our people?" The economy has become the raison d'etre, the explanation for exploitation. And if you draw a line through our history, that's been true all the way along. Slavery was an economic move. Low-wage workers is an economic move. The exploitation of the undocumented is an economic move. And we, the people, need to reveal that choice and to offer an alternative for the sake of the dignity of all. Now, those of us that walk in white skin, I know I sometimes feel kind of bad about that. Does that ever happen to you where you feel like, oh my gosh, oh please don't link me with a person in the White House, please. But the truth is, I think we cannot afford the luxury of embarrassment or guilt. And that one of the things we've got to make peace with is that we who are in white skin are required to be missionaries to folks who look like us. Too often when we talk about racism, we make it the challenge of people of color, the new person, the person we don't know, the one who looks a little different. But our economic exploitation, my friends, is really about us white folk not paying attention, not calling out, not using our privilege for dominance, but use our privilege for inclusion. We've got the capacity to take these so important stories to folks who will never hear them otherwise. That we are called to be missionaries for the common good means we are being called to be missionaries to share the stories that you heard last night, the stories you talked about today, the stories that you know from your churches, your neighborhoods. But we in white skin have the capacity to enter in where others can't. And it's our responsibility. Now, I did hear that there was this niggling problem. Well, we don't have enough young people. Well, here's the problem, is that my hunch is we've got here the people that we need to make this movement happen, because those of us with gray hair look much less threatening. Folks are way more likely to hear our old crotchety story if we can share it with a compelling heart, with what moves us. And that is where I think the challenge is too often I shift into my lobbying mode about policy. I love arguing policies and principles and engagement, and I'm kind of tough, I find out, and I thoroughly enjoy it. It's my lawyer self that blossoms in a wonderful way. But you know what? My experience is it doesn't change anyone's mind. And the only way to change a mind, I think, at this point, is first to change a heart. It is when the heart is changed we begin to take in new data. Here's the challenge. I have argued about immigration reform forever. I have argued that with DACA kids that they needed a path to citizenship, that we need to adjust status of families that have been engaged in serving in the community, that have done menial work that no one else wants to do, and that it is wrong that our people have to live in the shadows. I have argued that. I've had principles about it. In 2013, we did a whole bus trip about it. And then I met some people and began telling those stories. In Kansas City, this was actually 2 years ago when we were on the bus in Kansas City, just before Pope Francis came, I met Catherine, a 16-year-old who was left with her four siblings, one of whom, Stephanie, was a year and a half, or she was 12, and 3 who were both DACA eligible, and 3 citizen kids. Their parents went to the police station to pay a parking ticket and ended up getting deported. And Stephanie was left with her siblings and an elderly grandmother who was clearly overwhelmed. Stephanie was clearly in charge. Catherine was clearly in charge. She was the one holding the toddler, keeping an eye on the kids, making sure they weren't near the street. She was parenting. 16, at 16. Stephanie, when their folks were deported, she was 11. But Stephanie tried to figure out what she could do to help. And she was crying all the time. And what she figured out was, if she wasn't there, it would be better for her family. And she attempted suicide. Luckily, she wasn't successful. But when I saw her, which was about 2 months after her suicide attempt, she was still in tears because she wanted to help and didn't know what to do. That story for me has fueled my passion for why we need to fix our broken system, because our people, our children, are suffering. And it is wrong in the richest nation on earth that we continue this myth of scarcity that you all were talking about in your groups. Excuse me, there is plenty to go around. The issue is, are we willing to share? And so how do we then tell stories from the heart that compel a desire to share, as opposed to staying in the analysis of what's wrong and how we could fix this and what it ought to be and what the waiting list and blah, blah, you know, all those things? You know how that is? And often what I've discovered is, because we don't always understand all the details of policy, we think we can't take action. We can't talk about this. I don't know enough. Does that ever come to you? Oh yeah, oh yeah. Especially if you're in arguments with family members. That's usually when I feel it the most. But what I've discovered is, what we can say is, I don't know what the right fix is. I just know it's broken and needs to be fixed. Maybe together we could figure out a way forward. Maybe together we could make something different happen. Now, my advice is, don't go talk to your difficult relatives. Get somebody else to talk to your difficult relatives, and I'll do that part if you want, and you can take my brother, okay? But the challenge is that we begin to say, that we build up the pain about the anguish, about the reality now. This is our responsibility, and let's find a way to fix it. We don't have to have all the answers. That's part of white privilege, thinking that we ought to have it all together. It ought to be all of art. I've got it. I walk in white skin. I got to be in charge, you know. Good news. The answer is no, you don't. We can do this together. We can make it happen together. if we get people's hearts touched and committed to making a change. So how do we do this? How do we collaborate in a way that might improve the situation? Resist, and then know when we need to hide. Because this is an issue for the long haul. We may get a DACA fix. Yesterday at the meeting, the Democratic leadership has resolved, on both sides of the House, has resolved to attempt to get a vote on the DREAM Act before the end of the month. And one of the good news for Colorado is Gardner is a co-sponsor of the DREAM Act. So you need to call and say thank you. And then your second ask is to say, now be a leader and get more of your Republicans signed on. That's the deal. Thank you very much. This is so exciting to see. Now we're expecting him to be a leader and get more signed on. Got that? All right. Put him on speed dial. Do it every day. But because we're going to try to get this by the end of the month, which is like impossible, but we're trying it. The second thing that the Democrats have resolved is that there will be no extension in the debt ceiling, which is going to come up again in December with that cute deal that the president created. That's a whole other story. Invite me back for the economics of that one. Anyway, so in December, the debt ceiling is going to have to be dealt with again. And the Democrats are resolved that unless the DREAM Act is passed and the children protected in some form, this is not, the debt ceiling will not be raised. So we've got to put pressure. So the challenge is engaging at those key moments. The second thing that you should know about engaging is that there are a variety of resources out there about the various proposals that are in Congress, and one is the National Immigration Law Center. If you're one of those people that loves side-by-side comparisons, I believe there's a link to it up on our website. This compares the two moving bills are the DREAM Act and what's called the RAC Act, Recognizing America's Children, which is actually the Republicans sort of watering down the DREAM Act and trying to get a Republican-type DREAM Act, which is a good idea, but it's not as good. Some of the things you ought to know, it's different. It doesn't include as many kids. It doubles the wait time to even get permanent residence. It limits the access to work visas. And what was the other thing that it did? I made some notes here. It creates 2 5-year terms in the hope that of a legal protected status, in the hope that kids don't renew. They're not paying attention, so they don't renew, so they fall out of the system. So it's that, again, hurdle upon hurdle upon hurdle. And so it's not as good as the DREAM Act, but it's an effort for the Republicans to say, see, we're doing something. And so our response to that is, I'm glad you're doing something, but do something better. The DREAM Act is better, so do it. Why are you trying to hurt these kids for political points? This is about our children. Fix it. Got the idea? All right, okay. So what do we do? So that's the engagement part. That's the conversation. And I must say the meeting that we had on Tuesday with Jennifer Korn at the White House, she's in the Office of Public Engagement, was a tiny bit hopeful in that she has worked on immigration reform and actually cares about it. So that was a teeny little glimmer of hope in that process. How long she's going to be able to stand to work in the White House, I don't know. But that was a teeny glimmer of hope, and she really is asking for us to give her data about what's going on, stories, difficult stories, things that are happening, because Jennifer was saying about this massive raid that they were saying was going to happen next week. They're now saying it's not going to happen. Postponed, not canceled. So it's not going to happen next week, but we think postponed is a face-saving device, but what made the difference was people standing up, the engagement, okay? So we're going to take her word for that and engage her, all right? So that's engagement, how we try to make things better. We got to put pressure on the Democrats to hold to their promise that nothing move. We also have to put pressure on our Republicans to step up, for God's sakes. The reason immigration reform did not pass in 2013-14 was because John Boehner willfully refused to bring it up in the House of Representatives. We had the votes, but because we didn't have a majority of the Republicans, and John Boehner thought he was the Speaker of the Republicans, he didn't bring it up. So we've got to keep the pressure on. That's engagement. Resistance. What do we do to resist? Well, I keep thinking of, Dietrich Bonhoeffer from World War II, who was the Lutheran martyr who engaged in creating communities of resistance. And this is where I think resistance has possibilities, is in community. We cannot do this alone. But this is where our white privilege becomes a stumbling block, because we think we've been trained, our culture says you should be able to do it on your own. I'm tough. The challenge is we need community to do this, to know where resistance makes the most sense. And what does resistance look like? Well, resistance can be the simple thing of telling stories, of engaging, of telling the stories that you heard here, of your experience, of your worry, speaking from your heart in a way that is not culturally approved, so that you speak about something more than the Broncos when you're with people who might have different opinions, that you risk saying your heart, that this is breaking your heart, or whatever it is, but that comes from an emotional space that matters. See how that can be resistance? Because here's the deal. By engaging, we reduce the fear. By engaging, we build bridges. By engaging, we can hear other perspectives and expand. And this control that they're attempting to do grows in fear, not in bridge building. Okay, got it? See how that works? So, telling stories, telling worries, telling your own family story, talking about your grandfather, great-grandfather, grandmother. My grandmother came, on my mom's side, came to Denver with my grandpa, and she was from Germany. She immigrated from Germany because of the pogroms in the turn of the century, the last century. She was a nurse. She was an amazing woman, contributed a lot to Aurora. While my grandfather ran the newspaper, she became like Miss Social Worker around in her old-time Aurora. But it's those kinds of stories where we share stories that can weave us together and can be resistance. It's also resistance to show up at rallies. It's also resistance to harbor folks who are being sought in a raid. It's also resistance to report raids and get the information out there. And the question becomes, what can you do? Where are you called? Which brings me to the third point of hiding. Hiding. Now, I thought hiding was just, crawling in a hole and playing Rip Van Winkle. Wake me up in 4 years, please, okay? Don't let me live through this. Well, that might be a part of it, but hiding is also the place where I believe some of the most important work can happen. Because I believe the most important work may be to be in a reflective, contemplative place where we listen to the anguish of our time, where we listen to this struggle, where we try not to make sense of it, but to open ourselves up to the pain of this moment. And in the pain of this moment, our faith teaches us it's death to life. I have good news for you. This might be dying, so that we might know new life as a nation. And it's that piece that I think is the biggest challenge of all. Because I know what happens to me. I do morning meditation, and when I do my morning meditation, what often rises up is my to-do list of being active, being engaged, getting everything done, calling, blah, 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 blah. But I think the most important place is for us, especially us older folks, to let our hearts be broken open in a place so that the new can emerge. And that hiding then becomes not a passive escape, rather it becomes that internal engagement to move into the pain of this time and let something new emerge. Because the past is what created this mess. And I would encourage you to read in a reflective way. I never know how to say his first name. Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in Atlantic. His new article in Atlantic. It's up online. Everybody's reading it. But it's called Trump, the First White President. And I think it breaks open the pain of this time in a new way. And to be able to hold that insight in quiet and prayer may lead us to something new. Of course, I could be wrong. It might not. But what I can tell you is if we don't do it, we're not going to get any place if it's just the knee-jerk reaction. So it's call to action, folks. It's folks who care about this stuff passionately. Then what we need to make sure is that we bring all of our skills to bear. So in advocacy, if you're into texting, I would urge you to text us at Network. If you do 877-877, and you put in just the word DACA, D-A-C-A. It's okay if you take out your phones and then follow me on Twitter. But anyway, but if you text us at Network, then what we've created is a special alert system where only for the big, mega important things, we won't bug you, we won't drive you nuts. It's just only when it's really important, we'll text you and say what needs to be done. If you text 877-877 and the word DACA, then it comes to us and there's a text that comes back you have to put in your email, but then we get you, okay? You get into our system. We make sure you're real. That's the challenge. So be involved someplace. AFSC does great work. The American Friends Service Committee does great work. We work with them in DC. Be involved someplace. The second is in resistance. Resistance, what are you going to do to resist? Where are you called to resist? And then the third is where do you need to hide so that this new can emerge? How is the contemplative going to break open? Because unless we change the direction, we are in deep trouble. Now, we also, in that process, need to do this together. And that, I think, maybe is the most important part, because if we do it together, then we will change how we move. We will change our society, the individualism, the fear that created this current reality. In Indianapolis, I met this guy, this is before the election, who was this avid Trump supporter. It was really for Trump. And he was kind of this burly, maybe early 50s guy. It was like, whoa. And so I said, gee, you know, why are you, what's going on? Why are you supporting him? And weren't you kind? Thank you. What I realized was that, so I could ask him the question, and he said, well, you know, really, I'm for him because he's tough. I saw him on television. He said, you're fired. I mean, he won't take anything. He's tough. And so I said, well, what does he have to be tough about? Well, his kids. I mean, this guy's kids, they graduated from college and they weren't able to get jobs, and they had the student debt, and he was trying to pay it, and they weren't. His parents had always told this guy that if you worked hard, played by the rules, you'd get ahead. It was all the individualism, the individual narrative about how you work hard, played by the rules, and take care of your family. And then he started talking about how his dad had taken care of him, but he hadn't been able to do it for his kids, and he felt bad. And I don't know what made me say it, but I said to him, well, it sounds like maybe you're kind of ashamed that you didn't measure up to your parents' expectations. Is that true? Bam, he got tears in his eyes. And I realized that this anger, this hostility, this judgment was masking a whole bunch of other feelings. And that unless we touch those feelings and make our world a bit different, we're not going to be able to touch the anger. And the anger does get expressed in fear of the stranger, fear of the immigrant. It gets expressed in the economic fear, this idea that I have to do it all myself and I get afraid of anybody else in my neighborhood. Well, call to action. I have a hunch that the action that we're called to at this point is to become missionaries. Missionaries of the common good that have a heart for the whole. That this heart for the whole takes in the anguish of our times, even the folks we disagree with. Takes in their anguish and in our hearts finds a way to let people know they're not alone. And that in that meeting, then there is a possibility to move forward in a new way. And maybe the most important action of all is to hold ourselves open in prayer to what the new might be. Because like the hurricanes that are swirling out in the Caribbean, that I'm kind of obsessed with, quite frankly, because I'm worried about friends and colleagues, that hurricane is alive among us. And rather than batten down the hatches, I think part of our work has to be to open up doors and windows, to be in relationship, to connect, to believe, to know that we can make a difference. Now, it feels overwhelming. It feels like too much. We're too old to do this. We only have a few young people. How in God's green earth are we going to do this? Well, what I'd like to do is close with a poem that some of you have probably heard because it's my favorite one that I've written, or currently my current favorite. And it's called Loaves and Fish. And we just had the gospel not that long ago. Remember the story? Jesus, all these people following him, sort of like a bus, only he was walking, I guess. And the apostles say to him, well, they've been with us all day. Send them back to town before they get grumpy. And Jesus says to him, feed them yourselves, which is what he says to us. This is pretty scary. Feed them yourselves. And good old Peter, my patron, says, oh, we've got a couple of day-old loaves of bread and a couple of stinky fish, but what's that among so many? And Jesus, ever the community organizer, good call to action method, has everybody sit down in groups of 50, spread out, and blesses the bread, the fish. They break it, and all these people were fed. And in Matthew's gospel it says, 5,000 men were fed, to say nothing of the women and children. Now this made me mad. I thought, well, what are we? Chopped liver, for God's sakes? So I prayed about it. As you can tell, I have a rather unusual prayer life. And I discovered, I think this is the truth, or it's the truth according to Simone. They only counted the ones who thought it was a miracle, the 5,000 men, because the women had brought snacks from home, and the real issue was sharing. Wasn't that the case? I mean, at our family gatherings here in Denver, you know, the guys would be outside talking, and then it'd be time for dinner. They'd come in, wow, look at all this food. What a miracle. But it's the truth. It's the work that we have to do. It's the sharing. And so this is my poem, and this is how we'll end, and then we'll open it up for questions. And it goes like this: loaves and fish. I always joked that the miracle of loaves and fish was sharing. The women always knew this. But in this moment of need and notoriety, I ache, tremble, almost weep at folks so hungry, malnourished, faced with spiritual famine of epic proportions. My heart aches with their need. Apostle-like I whine. What are we among so many? The consistent 2,000-year-old ever-new response is this: blessed and broken, you are enough. I savor the blessed, cower at the broken, and pray to be enough. Thank you very much. Now for my favorite part, because I hear myself talk all the time. I really love the exchanges, questions, engagement, comments. What do you think? Where are you? What's going on? And we have a microphone that will allow people to be heard. So I see a hand being volunteered, a couple in the back. So why don't we start in the back? And what I'm going to do so that we don't have Marcy getting all of her steps in a heartbeat, we're going to do regions. So kind of, how's that, Marcy? Is that a good thing? Okay, so first here, then the back, then we'll do this section, come up here, across, and back. Got it. Okay, stand up so people can see you.
So one thing that I noticed, especially over the election, is that there's very much a divide within the, quote, evangelical vote. And it seems like people think that God sticks with one party or the other, not both.
So not that I think that. Oh.
How do you counter that, and how do you fully integrate your belief to try to bring about compromise and bring about what the true meaning of the gospel is within politics?
Well, I think one of the things that is really challenging is that church leadership, both in our beloved Roman Catholic Church and in the evangelical community, white evangelical community, got seduced by opportunities for power and access to the White House. And that the loyalty became more about loyalty to that power opportunity and the thought of what we could do for our people than it was actually to the gospel. And this is the challenge, to be both in relationship and supportive, but also to be the prod and the push. So like with the Obama administration, I mean, we agreed with the Obama administration on a lot of things. We disagreed on others. We disagreed on trade. We disagreed on some of the immigration stuff, Lord knows, on 150 million times. But to take a position, I think the challenge is when evangelical or the Roman Catholic leadership sees it, they're seeing it more as institutional opportunity than broken hearts about the people. And so that, for me, is the challenge. Now, I have some evangelical friends I'm one of the Auburn Senior Fellows, and Lisa Sharon Harper, who was at Sojourners, who's just left Sojourners, is starting to try to help move, she's evangelical herself, and help move the white evangelical community. She herself is African American, but has a lot of contacts. And so my hunch is, since I'm not evangelical, I don't speak their language. So I don't think I've got much hope at that. But to put people in proximity of individuals is key. Stories. So Lisa's actually going to do a bus trip. This ought to be interesting. Hardly wait to see. 3-day bus trip for evangelical leaders. And she's women leaders, which is sort of like women leaders in the Roman Catholic Church too. But the effort, I think, is mostly about dialogue. And to not, it's so hard for me, because my judgmentalness kicks in and I want to strangle them. Or vote them off the island. That's my usual metaphor. But it's important that we keep it about the people impacted and not just about the power that we want and the justification that we make. But I have a hunch that for the evangelicals, especially coming out of the South, that it is a white privilege is the most difficult thing for them to engage. And ironically, they believe Jesus was white. And that the measure of God's love for you is how prosperous you are. And it's this prosperity gospel that is the heart of it, and I don't even know how to begin to engage that. I'm much better with our bishops, pointing out Pope Francis's Evangelium Gaudium, the Joy of the Gospel, and Laudato Si, and the other Catholic social teaching. I'll take them on anytime. But then my adversarial method's probably not the best either. So I'll bring my stories, tell my stories, please, please. But maybe you're a missionary to them. Maybe that's your job. That'd be cool. We need it. We need it. Thank you. Who else back there?
I just wanted to say that the idea has occurred to...
Yeah, I got to speak into it and speak up. There we go.
Occurred to me that the idea of white people stepping forward can many times, with the brown folks affected by DACA or the lack of immigration reform, many times can be more effective than them trying to do it or us trying to do it by ourselves.
To be an ally, to be in relationship.
To be an ally and to be out front as an ally. And in that sense, you know, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. And that's my second point is that when we are when we think about, you know, we're too old, we're white-haired, well, you know, this is the time that we have
Amen.
To give back. And it isn't about a choice. It's about a responsibility, is the way I see it. And then my third point is...
Okay, and then we'll cut it at 3? Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that I went into hiding this morning. I was overwhelmed last night seeing people I've seen here for years, white-haired, more white-haired, and listening to the 3 people and knowing Arturo personally very well, knowing that when he was in sanctuary the first time, he was living on a credit card to support his family. And that credit card debt has increased because I asked him about it last night. So I went into hiding this morning. I had to do my meditation. I had to do my yoga. And I'm ready now.
Good.
I'm back here and I'm ready. So
yes.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Oh, amen. Amen. And the important thing is know when you need hiding. It's okay as long as you don't stay there permanently. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
And when I originally came here today, I came here for another reason because I thought this was something other than immigration reform. But I believe that you're speaking. I'm very happy that I came. The education is incredible. And I think there's a real call to action. And I think I want to stand behind what you said. And I think I've learned through our parish and through a priest that we have there about something that just totally backs up your concept of going after stories. And this person, there's a book out, it's called Theophostic Prayer, which is a kind of a weird spelling, Theophostic, P-H-O-S-T-I-C, I think. My brain went dead, and I can't tell you the name of the author.
There couldn't be two books with that same name.
No, but he's, I think, I want to say he's Baptist, but and he is a psychologist, and he's spent years trying to help people with their problems, and he found something out, and it was that you can't change somebody with an idea, but you can change them if you can change how they feel about it.
Amen.
And that is the key, that we need to talk, and I think you made the point, but I just wanted to support it, that you need to talk about feelings and about your emotions. And if you can express your emotions, or you can do a good job of expressing somebody else's emotions about something, you can touch them and you can change them, just like that man who was behind Trump, that you got to his heart.
I did. I scared him, though. I went a little too fast, but it was. But he'll think about it. He'll think about it.
He'll think about it, and that's how he can change.
Amen.
You have to change somebody's heart. You can't change their mind.
Thank you. Good point. Okay. Now we're going to start moving a little faster because we've got a whole bunch of hands now. People are getting into this. I love it. Okay, it'll come up this side.
You spoke about hiding as being a very reflective place.
Could be, yeah.
A place of deeper engagement, actually. And the word that came to mind as opposed to hiding would be retreating. And I was wondering why you picked the word hiding.
Well, I picked it mostly because the Resistance Museum used it. And I also, it resonated with my temptation to pull the covers up over my head and hide. And so I have a hunch that I was trying to use that temptation to avoid as being an invitation to go deeper. And that if you call it retreating, it sounds very noble and church-like, and, I'm my best self. And if I call it hiding, to me that resonates with that visceral place, which is like, no more MSNBC, no more CNN, no more, no more public news, PBS NewsHour, no more, no more Denver Post. I'm stopping. I'm hiding. Can't take it. That place is the place I was trying to touch. Okay, up this side. Got a couple up here.
I would like to thank you because I have that problem with my family. But I also have a problem with my church.
Oh, yes.
If I, as a priest, and I talked on DACA the last Sunday, when I was in the mountains, I was talking to a Spanish-speaking community that needed assurance that God loves them.
Oh.
But when I'm in Denver, I am afraid, when is the bishop going to call me in? Because I talked politics in my sermon.
You talked Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Amen.
So that's where I'm at. And
I feel your pain. I get it. I totally get it. One of the great joys for my life is that Network, our organization, isn't related to the institutional church, and therefore when we got named by the Vatican in the 2012 censure of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, I mean, the real reason we had a bus is because we had all this notoriety. So we get to thank the Vatican for the bus. So but the challenge is, but we're not institutionally connected. And so for priests of the diocese, it becomes a real struggle. How is it that we move this forward? And I wonder, I have no idea, but what pops in my head is the same thing we were saying about vulnerability, is to say, rather than talking on DACA and politics, talk on the story, and about my own apprehension. What I've realized is, for me, the gospel lives in these issues, and I cannot talk gospel without talking these issues. But what happens to my heart when I become afraid to share with you my prayerful insights? Then who am I as a pastor? How can I do that? And I want to be the best pastor possible for you, so I need to share where my prayer has led me. Would you let me do that? And that way of being vulnerable might, possibly, perhaps, maybe. Can I add a few more? Might make it okay. But Jennifer was telling me that the bishop has done a letter on some small letter.
Something really fast?
Yeah.
So the Archbishop here did issue a letter a couple of weeks ago asking people to speak. So if you get called, I'd say, well, you asked me and talk about it in your letter to priests. And then the other thing is, there are other priests in Colorado who face this same dilemma. And I would go back to the community that Simone was talking about, to trying to find one another and to work together to figure out how to share what these experiences you're having. Because there are definitely other folks in the pews who want to hear those stories and those insights. They're just not as loud as the folks who are, because the folks who are loud are really afraid and really broken. So for every person who comes up after to say something, there's probably 10 people who are really mulling that over, you know. So I think maybe we can talk later, but to be connected.
Amen.
Because there are other folks, yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, we're working. We're coming across the top and we're coming back. I think we're okay time-wise. Yeah.
I am a feminist.
Yes.
I am a lesbian.
Yes.
And I'm an evangelical.
Good.
Which makes me a giant oxymoron.
No, not readily understood by some.
And I'm also a professional nurse. I've been a nurse for years. I've worked in the prisons and the jails and home care, community health, and my strong suit is behavioral health. I worked at Wyatt Edison and would have little kids come in, and I would examine them, and their tonsils would be white. I couldn't get a hold of their parents, and when I did, they were terrified. I said, this little one needs to go to be seen. So I'd call Denver Health. They'd say, we'll see him if you have $100. I said, lady, if I had $100, I wouldn't be talking to you. The one place that really would always see these kids was Children's, which that's a good thing for everybody to remember.
Amen.
But my question in my statement, obviously, is we cannot, I as a health care provider have to look at the health of these little ones. And even the one that you talked about, a responsibility for a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, they need someone to talk to. Amen. And not just about spiritual things, but about reality.
Survival.
And all of, yes, absolutely. So,
yes.
Your response?
Well, I guess I want to say the first thing, because your identifiers are what a lot of us do, which put us outside community, which worries me deeply. Because to bear the quality of pain that you're talking about in seeing suffering kids and seeing a system so broken that they can't get care, it can only be born in community. But, I meet so many people who say, oh, I'm formerly Catholic. Well, I'm sort of your Catholic, but not the other Catholic. I don't belong, I'm out, I'm this, I'm that. And that, for me, is a response to all those other voices out there that have said it about us. And rather, what we've got to do to make is to not accept that definition, but rather the definition that who my identity is in relationship with these kids. Who my identity is in radical acceptance of everyone, of a gospel-based person, of whatever you want to say, but how are we positively inclusive when often it's our church who wants to say we're outside, right? Because then we can be controlled. And if we take on that external definition, then we've limited our own engagement. Does that make sense? So, first of all, let's all define ourselves as included in somebody's care. Maybe not Mitch McConnell's, but somebody's. Or Benedict's, so let's be real. But, so we're included in somebody's care and not defined as out. But the challenges that I think you're raising is that when you tell the story, there are consequences to these stories. And part of it is a broken heart leads someplace. And so where does it lead? How do these people get health care? And while Cory Gardner has been really good on immigration, signing up for the DREAM Act, he's been piss poor on health care. So these are the same people who have a right to care. And so we carry not just the issue, we carry the people. And we've got to lift that up together so you don't carry it alone. Does that make some sense? Yeah. So we've got to be able to say, I've got a community that will support me in bearing this anguish, but it's wrong that our nation does this to kids. And it's bad for our future. It's real bad for our future. Let's change it. Okay, one here and then we'll come over here. Promise.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask about something that I view as one of the biggest agonies of our time, which is the fallacy that we have to choose between one of the two major political parties in our country, or that President Trump is so very different from 2015 President Obama and the massive deportations that he initiated as president. And I know as a young Catholic trying to reform the Catholic Church while trying to reform the country, while trying to get involved in the right places, I get frustrated sometimes when the church aligns itself with candidates like Cory Gardner or seems to buy into this fallacy that we do only have political parties. So I wanted to ask you how you try to nurture in your ministry, in addition to compromising and working on the reform aspect with the parties that we have in power right now, how you try to nurture young candidates of color, how you try to nurture parties that might more accurately reflect true Catholic social teaching rather than on compromising on so many aspects of what our faith really demands.
Here's what I've learned. Ain't good news. That as long as a group has no power, they can be the best, purest possible. And once there is power, then you begin compromise. It's the nature of the beast. And I learned that actually when I was a senior in college and I was in Model United Nations. And we went to New York. It was really exciting. From California, it was really great. Oh, so much fun. And we represented the country of Mali in West Africa. And they had absolutely no power at all. But by damned, we could have the best rhetoric. We were pure. We were engaged with the people's movement. I mean, we were all this. But when we started engaging with other countries who had some power to make some of what we wanted to happen, then we needed to work at compromise. And it is the reality that if you are going to navigate these political realms, if that's where you're called, then compromise is a piece of it. The second thing is, though, praise God, we're not all called to be networkers. Okay, that's my organization, Network. What we desperately need is a wide variety of responses. And what I hear in what you're saying is such an echo of my younger self. In the anti-war, you know, oh my God, all the Central America, all of that anguish, I was much more in the resistance mode than I am in the now that is way more about political engagement. So there's a time and a rhythm for everything. Everyone is needed to make a change. Now, too often, those of us that are working on change, we tend to fight each other. You've ever been in a committee meeting? I think we ought to be on the barricades. No, we've got to have a call-in. No, we've got to do a op-ed in the Post. We've got to, you know, those kinds of things. You ever been around for that? Yeah. And you're fighting. Why isn't the answer yes? But where I think we get in trouble is we become insecure about the movement of the Spirit within ourselves, where we're called personally. And so when I'm beginning to think, well, I think everybody ought to join me because I'm right, it's usually a sign that I'm insecure about my position. Okay? So the challenge is to, in those moments of quiet reflection, trust the voice inside. We will not be left orphaned. We will not. We're never left orphaned if we trust. But too often we have this, coming back yesterday from this thing where Nancy Pelosi says in front of all these people, oh, Sister Simone, inspire us. It's like, I don't know what I said. I know about the museum, the Resistance Museum in Van Gogh. I didn't even tell you the Van Gogh part. Okay, this afternoon when we talk, I'll tell you the Van Gogh part. But the thing that I was walking back to our office and I started beating myself up. Oh, I should have said that. I should have said this. I should have said that. I should have said this. And all of a sudden I realized, idiot. You're the one that always preaches we won't be left orphaned. Trust what you said was the Spirit and it's enough. And then later I got a phone call that afternoon from somebody who'd been at the meeting just to thank me for those words. They'd really needed to hear it. Well, thank you, Holy Spirit. Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay, cool. Yes, okay, we're going to go over here first and then the middle. I promise you, we won't leave you orphaned.
I like to be a myth buster.
Cool.
And people who know my work know I really mean that. And I would like all of your help, and especially yours, Sister Simone, on my latest myth I want to bust.
Oh, I'll tell you, it always makes me nervous when people tell me you ought to join my bandwagon.
Well, here it goes.
Okay.
I think that there's a conservative myth that poor people are lazy. And I think they perpetuate that myth. And it's the bootstrap thing, you know? And I think that in some ways, our founding documents are somewhat to blame for it. All men are created equal. Well, they're not. We know that. They may be equal under the law.
Equal in dignity.
Yes.
I mean, that's Catholic social teaching.
That's Catholic social teaching. But they've construed that to be that if you're poor, you're lazy, you don't care, you're not a worthy person in the community. And I know that when a rich person says, I worked hard for what I have and I'm not giving it up, that they are saying that the family, the mother and father who are working 4 jobs between them are not working hard.
Okay, there's a whole nother talk I do all about income and wealth disparity, because that is the big issue at Network. Join us at Network, because it's all about Mend the Gaps. Because and Spirit Level, which is the book that started us down this path, lifts up how the 100% have a lower quality of life when income and wealth disparity is greater. And I do this whole thing, the human bar graph and all this other stuff. So I absolutely agree. You don't have to get me on your bandwagon. I already am. And I've tweeted at Paul Ryan, which just annoys the hell out of me that he won't talk to me right now. But about this, because the tax, the other piece that we're not talking about is taxes, because this is an immigration thing. But this tax reform, we've got to be highly engaged, highly active in the same methods of acting. It's really hard to get as passionate about taxes, but we at Network have some methods to get passionate about taxes. So join us in this. If they ever, right now, all the big players are fighting it out. It's really kind of nice to watch. Us little players have our periscope up to watch, but I don't know if it's actually going to move. But the tax policy is the principal thing that's created the income and wealth disparity, which has promoted this. And the real issue is the highly wealthy are so far away from the reality of working people, they don't have a clue. The myth. All right, now we've got people over here, back on the topic. We could stay all night and I could give all my talks. How's that?
Where are the bishops on all this? Now, I appreciate Jennifer saying that our bishop sent a letter to all the parishes. And Thomas Reese, a couple of weeks ago, pointed out that the U.S. bishops have made 20 statements on immigration, but I assume those are broad statements that are motherhood and God. Well, DACA, if they could get together on DACA, they would have a tremendous power with Congress, and that power is consistent both with the moral imperative and also with the future power of the Catholic Church, because it's in immigration where the future power of the Catholic Church. Which is what Steve Bannon made him mad this week, and made me mad too. But anyway, that's a really good point. Here's the challenge, is that the bishops are actually very good. Of all of our issues, the bishops are very good on immigration. They have a whole Justice for Immigrants program. If you go on their website, they've got some good resources. The problem is that the quality of leadership in the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is sorely lacking. And so there is not the same, how can I say, they make these statements, but they never do anything with it. And they often issue these statements on Fridays, which are the worst days. Any communications person will tell you it's the worst day to issue it. So they sort of issue it to say we did it, but they don't want anybody to know about it. And so, but some good news yesterday was at this meeting with Nancy Pelosi, Riva, who's our contact person, had reached out to me to get an email address for for Ashley Feasley, who's heading the Justice for Immigrants right now. And she got the bishop's lobbyists to go to this meeting. And what Riva told me is she had never been able to get him to show what's his name? Michael Hall? I think it's Mike Hall. Anyway, to show up at any of these meetings. So she took it as a good sign that the bishops were going to weigh in on this one. And another phone, if you're called to it, call the Archdiocese office, leave a message for the bishop how important it is that we speak up on this. You're so grateful for his letter, looking forward to hearing about it in the parish. I mean, that's another way of advocacy that can be supported for the priests of the parish, they get caught.
is call the bishop and tell him thank you. Oh, this is fabulous. Even though it's not 100%, you nourish them along the way. Okay? Yeah, but it's an important piece. They're good in theory, bad, not so hot in practice. But it's because of the weak leadership. I mean, they don't have the best gene pool for this, you know? It's very hard because the guys that have ascended before Francis were the ones who were interested in power. And that's the pain. That's the pain of it. More interested in power than gospel. But their definition of power was to promote the gospel in this sense. And what my prayers led me to is to realize that they think spiritual leadership is about enforcing the rules. They have no idea what spiritual leadership is, which is something like Pope Francis yesterday was with the Colombians who had been, at war, praying for peace and weeping with both sides. I mean, that's spiritual leadership in my book, but unfortunately the definitions have gotten lost, and he's promoting a new one, so we need to support that. Challenge. Okay, where'd our microphone go? Oh, okay, stand up, just be bold.
Okay. So I was thinking a lot about, when you were speaking about the difference between charity and justice and sort of that whole striking a balance. So I, like you, really like to have statistics and understand policy and try to read a lot so that I'm very well informed and I can perhaps defend my position. And I'm just wondering a little more about how do you strike a balance with stories so that it's inviting people to investigate and understand an issue, and also giving them the chance to be with people. So, I'm thinking about primarily those that maybe don't fall in my camp. I mean, in this community, we're all validated by one another, right? We're all here for the same purpose. So if in fact your end goal is to get more people to sort of follow what you believe is the right thing, I think they need both the facts to do so and the experience of spending time with whatever the other is so that you are making progress in a new way. And I'm just wondering sort of how, since your engagement is often very high political levels and you have to be well informed, and yet you're saying stories are the thing that really move people, I want to know about a balance, because I think a balance is necessary, particularly in a time where social media and everyone's point of view is forefront as opposed to what real statistics look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's correct. And we at Network always try to strike that balance between story and fact, stories and data, stories and implementation. I just wrote the column, envisioning column, and for our magazine for the next issue, it's going to be on housing. And so I give 3 or 4 stories and then talk about how our housing policy is piss poor and is the least renewed and what we have to do about it. So it's using it that way. Let me just give you an example of a group that I met in St. Louis, Mothers to Mothers, that started after Ferguson, African-American moms who've done amazing work, and they decided they had to do something because their African-American sons were being threatened and killed. And so they decided to go to groups of the African-American moms would go to groups of white moms to talk about what African-American moms have to worry about that white moms don't, just to share the stories. And that's a play, that for me was a great model, because what they did was they talked about both their own experience, but then also the biases with which laws are enforced. And in doing that, it was really kind of a transformative thing for both sides. So it's how do we take the story and let ourselves be transformed? Because here's the deal. If we're willing to be vulnerable, it also means that I'm willing to be changed, which means I'm not necessarily 100% correct, and that is very hard for me to deal with. I like being correct. I think I am. I'm highly opinionated, and I'll argue with you. But at the level of story, it causes me to think in a more complex fashion. And so I can have all the data, but if I have to add a piece I hadn't thought about, then that opens up. And you do it more with curiosity than you do it with judgment. So it's not about arguing. It's about curious. How do we do this? This is a problem that's giving me great pain. Here's what I see. What do you see? See the difference? Okay. All right, we've got...
one more question.
Only one more? Oh, okay. There's going to be another chance later, too, so, okay. One more. Who's going to be the valiant? The woman with the microphone's the decider. I'm abdicating power here.
I'm Henry Remmelkamp from Minnesota.
Yay, Minnesota.
Yay, Minnesota. Just as an example, in Minnesota, they say the workforce shortage that's coming is going to be largely unmet, and that more than half of the people that they need in jobs over the next 20 years are going to have to be immigrants because there aren't enough people even in the United States.
Immigrants are keeping us young.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. So assuming that most people of good faith, I don't mean religious faith, but good intentions, assume that we're not going to open the borders broadly to anyone who wants to come, and assuming that we're not going to limit immigration to zero, there's somewhere in the middle, and I'm thinking that there's got to be some sort of criteria that says who's allowed to come and who can't. Are there people working on developing some sort of consensus? You know, Arturo last night came to have a better life for his family. The formula proposed by Donald Trump would, of course, pick all the people who already have a good life. And so I wonder if there's anyone that's trying to work out what the coming consensus should be.
That's a really good question. There was a fair amount of work trying to find the balance. Here's the challenge. The 2013 bill that got out of the Senate struck a new balance between family immigration and business. And that's the tension, is because business wants what they want because the economy is the most fragile thing we've got. How about our people? But here's the other piece, is what we know is that immigrants do better if their families come with them. Because if they've got kids, then they learn English faster, they get involved in the community. And if you just have the immigrant alone is usually isolated, frightened, not engaged, and there's more problems there. So what they did, which was in the 2013 bill, was to come up with a reduction, what looked like a reduction in family visas to increase the business visas. It used to be 2/3, 1/3, business, family. They did a 50-50, but what they did was to say that on the business visa side, the families of those getting business visas could come with, but they were counted as business visas, which ended up that not detracting that much from family visas, where communities do better if you've got families. So it's that model. Now, if we can ever get anything broader going, it's going to be that's going to be in the balance there. But there's a bunch of people that have thought about it, that have worked on it. And we actually worked out a pretty good compromise. The faith community was all about families. Business community was all about businesses. And then we said, well, how do we work this? And that was where it was. Oh, no, because John Boehner wouldn't bring it up because they didn't have a majority of the Republicans who would vote for it. They had a majority of the House, and John Boehner decided he was Speaker of the Republicans, not Speaker of the House. And so that led to his resigning in 2015, and nobody's been willing to touch it since then. The other piece about Obama and deporting all these people, it is true that there were more deportations, but here's the painful. This is where reality and macroeconomics are painful, is because what they did was they redefined deportation. Part of the reason why it was such a dramatic spike is they redefined deportation to include just turning back people at the border. That if they tried to enter and they didn't have the proper documents and stuff and then were sent back, then that used to just be, we shut the door. But the Obama administration started calling it deportation because they were trying to build the pain in the community to get the pressure, enough political pressure, to get the politicians to improve the law. Additionally, it is true that there was more internal detention and more actual deportation than there had been in the Bush administration, who was also trying to fix the broken immigration system, which was the 07-08 effort. And then just one last thing on this that we've got to really be concerned about is the business model for the private prisons who are benefiting from high-level detention, and who many of the Trump appointees have stock, or their families have stock in these private prisons. And it's, pardon my cynicism, but just so that you know, in the 2007-2008 effort, where we tried to get immigration reform, what the counter was let's do enforcement first. Your message is that's what we've done, because in terms of Border Patrol budget, went from I hate these numbers, $2,115,000 just for Border Patrol budget in 2006-07 to in 2015-16 to $3,800,000,000. So and if you want to know more about this, you can look on the American Immigration Council. They have a lot of good data. You can just see it if you want to argue with it. And finally, before I just do really fast wrap up, is I saw some people that said Nebraska. I think I saw Nebraska on their tags. We need you to call Ben Sasse. Ben Sass, however he says his name, because he's a potential to sign on to the DREAM Act, because Nebraska needs the immigrant workers in your agriculture. So call him, please. Put him on speed dial. Call him every day. And get your friends to do likewise. Just to close, and then we'll do a thing later this afternoon, is that I really want to express my gratitude to you all, because most of us with the gray hair, when we were young and thinking about to the barricades and how do we do it and let's make this better, I really thought if I gave my life to this, we'd be in a much better place. I'm sorry we're not, but the truth is, this is the long haul. The gospel is never about arriving. The gospel is about the journey. And in that journey, we wander in the desert like Moses did, 40 years, feels like it, you know, kind of around in circles if you ever see the map they think it, that he followed. But every now and then, we meet up, we're connected, and we have the promise. We know the promise. This is about extending the promise to so many of our fellow people in our nation who feel as if there is no promise. You, people of hope, have a missionary call to extend it because our nation needs it. Thank you very much.
This is a very green congregation, so everything at lunch is in the commons next door. You may take lunch outside. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. I wanted to let you know it's on your program, but just as a reminder that lunch is being provided by the Women's Catering Collective of El Centro Humanitario in Denver. So your check that you wrote to call to action supports these women.